I call on the prosecutor for the United States.
May it please the tribunal. It occurs to me that perhaps the tribunal might be interested in a very brief outline of what might be expected to occur within the next week or 2 weeks in this trial. I shall immediately proceed with the aggressive war case to present the story of the rape of Czechoslovakia. I perhaps shall not be able to conclude that today. Sir Hartley Shawcross, the British chief prosecutor, has asked that he be allowed to proceed tomorrow morning with his opening statement on count 2. And I shall be glad to yield for that purpose, with the understanding that we shall resume on Czechoslovakia after that. Thereafter, the British prosecutor will proceed to present the aggressive warfare case as to Poland, which brought France and England into the war. Thereupon, the British prosecutor will proceed with the expansion of aggressive war in Europe, the aggression against Norway and Denmark, against Holland, Belgium, and Luxembourg, against Yugoslavia and Greece. And in connection with those aggressions, the British prosecutor will present to the tribunal the various treaties involved and the various breaches of treaties involved in those aggressions. That, as I understand it, will complete the British case under count 2 and will probably take the rest of this week. Then it will be necessary for the American prosecuting staff to come back to count 1 to cover certain portions which have not been covered, specifically persecution of the Jews, concentration camps, spoliation in occupied territories, the High Command and other alleged criminal organizations, particular evidence dealing with individual responsibility of individual defendants. Roughly, I would anticipate that that would carry through the following week, 2 weeks. That's very rough estimate. Thereupon, the French chief prosecutor will make his opening statement and will present the evidence as to crimes against humanity and war crimes under counts 3 and 4, as to Western countries, Western occupied countries. Following that, the Russian chief prosecutor will make his opening statement and will present corresponding evidence regarding war crimes and crimes against humanity in the eastern countries. That, in very rough outline, is what we have in mind to present. I turn now to the third section in the detailed chronological presentation of the aggressive war case, the aggression against Czechoslovakia. The relevant portions of the indictment are set forth in subsection 3 under section Roman 4, F, appearing at pages 7 and 8 of the printed English text of the indictment. This portion of the indictment is divided into 3 parts. A, the 1936 to 1938 phase of the plan, that is the planning for the assault both on Austria and Czechoslovakia. B, the execution of the plan to invade Austria, November 1937 to March 1938. C, the execution of the plan to invade Czechoslovakia, April 1938 to March 1939. On Thursday last, I completed the presentation of the documents on the execution of the plan to invade Austria. Those documents are gathered together in a document book which was handed to the tribunal at the beginning of the Austrian presentation. The materials relating to the aggression against Czechoslovakia have been gathered in a separate document book which I now submit to the tribunal and which is marked Document Book O. The tribunal will recall that in the period 1933 to 1936, the defendants had initiated a program of rearmament designed to give the Third Reich military strength and political bargaining power to be used against other nations. You will recall also that beginning in the year 1936, they had embarked on a preliminary program of expansion, which, as it turned out, was to last until March 1939. This was intended to shorten their frontiers, to increase their industrial and food reserves, and to place them in a position, both industrially and strategically, from which they could launch a more ambitious and more devastating campaign of aggression. At the moment, in the early spring of 1938, when the Nazi conspirators began to lay concrete plans for the conquest of Czechoslovakia, they had reached approximately the halfway point in this preliminary program. The preceding autumn, at the conference in the Reich Chancellery on 5 November 1937, covered by the Hossback Minutes, Hitler had set forth the program which Germany was to follow. Those Hossback Minutes, you will recall, are contained in document 386 PS, U.S. Exhibit number 25, which I read to the tribunal in my introductory statement a week ago today. The question for Germany, the Fuhrer had informed his military commanders at that meeting, is where the greatest possible conquest can be made at the lowest cost. At the top of his agenda stood two countries, Austria and Czechoslovakia. On 12 March 1938, Austria was occupied by the German army, and on the following day, it was annexed to the Reich. The time had come for a redefinition of German intentions regarding Czechoslovakia. A little more than a month later, two of the conspirators, Hitler and Keitel, met to discuss plans for the envelopment and conquest of the Czechoslovak state. Among this selected handful of documents which I read to the tribunal in my introduction a week ago, to establish the corpus of the crime of aggressive war, was the account of this meeting on 21 April 1938. This account is item 2 in our document number 388 PS, U.S. Exhibit number 26. The tribunal will recall that Hitler and Keitel discussed the pretexts which Germany might develop to serve as an excuse for a sudden and overwhelming attack. They considered the provocation of a period of diplomatic squabbling, which growing more serious would lead to an excuse for war. In the alternative, and this alternative they found to be preferable, they planned to unleash a lightning attack as the result of an incident of their own creation. Consideration, as we alleged in the indictment, and as the document proves, was given to the assassination of the German ambassador at Prague to create the requisite incident. The necessity of propaganda to guide the conduct of Germans in Czechoslovakia and to intimidate the Czechs was recognized. Problems of transport and tactics were discussed with a view to overcoming all Czechoslovak resistance within 4 days, thus presenting the world with a fait accompli and forestalling outside intervention. Thus, in mid-April 1938, the designs of the Nazi conspirators to conquer Czechoslovakia had already reached the stage of practical planning. Now, all of that occurred, if the tribunal please, against a background of friendly diplomatic relations. Now, this conspiracy must be viewed against that background. Although they had, in the fall of 1937, determined to destroy the Czechoslovak state, the leaders of the German government were bound by a treaty of arbitration and assurances, freely given, to observe the sovereignty of Czechoslovakia. By a formal treaty signed at Locarno, 16 October 1925, document TC-14, which will be introduced by the British prosecutor, Germany and Czechoslovakia agreed, with certain exceptions, to refer to an arbitral tribunal or to the Permanent Court of International Justice matters of dispute. I quote, they would so refer, all disputes of every kind between Germany and Czechoslovakia, with regard to which the parties are in conflict as to their respective rights, and which it may not be possible to settle amicably by the normal methods of diplomacy. And the preamble to this treaty stated, the President of the German Empire and the President of the Czechoslovak Republic equally resolved to maintain peace between Germany and Czechoslovakia by assuring the peaceful settlement of differences which might arise between the two countries, declaring that respect for the law, for the rights established by treaty or resulting from the law of nations is obligatory for international tribunals, agreeing to recognize that the rights of a state cannot be modified save with its consent, and considering that sincere observance of the methods of peaceful settlement of international disputes permits of resolving without recourse to force questions which may become the cause of division between states, have decided to embody in a treaty their common intentions in this respect. That ends the quotation. Formal and categoric assurances of their goodwill towards Czechoslovakia were forthcoming from the Nazi conspirators as late as March 1938. On 11 and 12 March 1938, at the time of the annexation of Austria, Germany had a considerable interest in inducing Czechoslovakia not to mobilize. At this time, the defendant Goering assured Monsieur Mastany, the Czechoslovak minister in Berlin, on behalf of the German government, that German-Czech relations were not adversely affected by the developments in Austria and that Germany had no hostile intentions toward Czechoslovakia. As a token of his sincerity, Defendant Göring accompanied his assurance with the statement, Ich gebe Ihnen mein Ehrenwort. I give you my word of honor. At the same time, the defendant von Neurath, who was handling German foreign affairs during Ribbentrop's stay in London, assured Monsieur Massenet, on behalf of Hitler and the German government, that Germany still considered herself bound by the Arbitration Convention of 1925. These assurances are contained in document TC-27, another of the series of documents which will be presented to the tribunal by the British prosecutor under count 2 of the indictment. Behind the screen of these assurances, the Nazi conspirators proceeded with their military and political plans for aggression. Ever since the preceding fall, it had been established that the immediate aim of German policy was the elimination both of Austria and of Czechoslovakia. In both countries, the conspirators planned to undermine the will to resist by propaganda and by fifth column activities, while the actual military preparations were being developed. The Austrian operation, which received priority for political and strategic reasons, was carried out in February and March 1938. Thenceforth, the Wehrmacht planning was devoted to Fall Grün, Case Green, the designation given to the proposed operation against Czechoslovakia. The military plans for Case Green had been drafted in outline form as early as June 1937. The OKW top secret directive for the unified preparation of the armed forces for war, signed by von Blomberg on 24 June 1937, and promulgated to the Army, Navy, and Luftwaffe for the year beginning 1 July 1937, included as a probable warlike eventuality for which a concentration plan was to be drafted, Case Green, quote, war on two fronts with the main struggle in the southeast. This document, R number C175, USA Exhibit 69, was introduced in evidence as part of the Austrian presentation and is an original carbon copy signed in ink by von Blomberg. The original section of this directive dealing with the probable war against Czechoslovakia, it was later revised, opens with this supposition. I read from the bottom of page 3 of the English translation of this directive. I'm reading from page 3 of the English copy. At the bottom of the page, following Roman heading 2 and subparagraph 1, headed suppositions. The war in the East can begin with a surprise German operation against Czechoslovakia in order to parry the imminent attack of a superior enemy coalition. the necessary conditions to justify such an action politically and in the eyes of international law must be created beforehand. After detailing possible enemies and neutrals in the event of such action, the directive continues as follows. 2. The task of the German armed forces, and that much is underscored, is to make their preparations in such a way that the bulk of all forces can break into Czechoslovakia quickly, by surprise, and with the greatest force, while in the West, the minimum strength is provided as rear cover for this attack. The aim and object of this surprise attack by the German armed forces should be to eliminate from the very beginning and for the duration of the war the threat by Czechoslovakia to the rear of the operations in the West, and to take from the Russian Air Force the most substantial portion of its operational base in Czechoslovakia. This must be done by the defeat of the enemy armed forces and the occupation of Bohemia and Moravia. The introduction to this directive sets forth as one of its guiding principles the following statement, and I now read from page 1 of the English translation. Nevertheless, that's the third paragraph following figure 1. Nevertheless, the politically fluid world situation, which does not preclude surprising incidents, demands constant preparedness for war on the part of the German armed forces. And then B under that, well, A. A, to counterattack at any time. B, to make possible the military exploitation of politically favorable opportunities should they occur. This directive ordered further work on the plan for mobilization without public announcement. I quote, in order to put the armed forces in a position to be able to begin a war suddenly, which will take the enemy by surprise, both as regards strength and time of attack. This directive is, of course, a directive for staff planning. But the nature of the planning and the very tangible and ominous developments which resulted from it give it a significance that it would not have in another setting. Planning along the lines of this directive was carried forward during the fall of 1937 and the winter of 1937-38. On the political level, this planning for the conquest of Czechoslovakia received the approval and support of Hitler in the conference with his military commanders on 5 November 1937, reported in the Hossbach minutes, to which I've frequently heretofore referred. In early March 1938, before the march into Austria, we find the defendants Ribbentrop and Keitel concerned over the extent of the information about war aims against Czechoslovakia to be furnished to Hungary. On 4 March 1938, Ribbentrop wrote to Keitel, enclosing for General Keitel's confidential cognizance the minutes of a conference with Stoye, S-Z-T-O-J-A-Y, the local Hungarian ambassador, who had suggested an interchange of views. This is document 2786 PS, a photostat of the original captured letter, which I now offer in evidence as Exhibit USA 81. In his letter to Keitel, Ribbentrop said, "I have many doubts about such negotiations. In case we should discuss with Hungary possible war aims against Czechoslovakia, the danger exists that other parties as well would be informed about this. I would greatly appreciate it if you notify me briefly whether any commitments were made here in any respect. With best regards, and Heil Hitler." At the 21 April meeting between Hitler and Keitel, the account of which I read last week and alluded to earlier this morning, document 388 PS, item 2, specific plans for the attack on Czechoslovakia were discussed for the first time. This meeting was followed in the late spring and summer of 1938 by a series of memoranda and telegrams advancing Case Green, Fall Grün. Those notes and communications were carefully filed at Hitler's headquarters by the very efficient Colonel Schmutt, the Führer's military adjutant, and were captured by American troops in his cellar at Obersalzberg near Berchtesgaden. This file, which is preserved intact, bears our number 388 PS and is U.S. Exhibit number 26, and which we affectionately referred to as Big Schmut, a large file. The individual items in this file tell more graphically than any narrative the progress of the Nazi conspirators' planning to launch an unprovoked and brutal war against Czechoslovakia. From the start, the Nazi leaders displayed a lively interest in intelligence data concerning Czechoslovak armament and defense. With the leave of the tribunal, I shall advert to some of these items in the Big Schmut file without reading them. The documents to which I refer are item 4 of the Schmut file, a telegram from Colonel Seitzler in General Jodel's office of the OKW to Schmut at Hitler's headquarters. Item 12.
Mr. Alderman.
Yes, sir.
Are you proposing not to read them?
I hadn't intended to read them in full unless that be necessary.
Well, I'm afraid we must adhere to our decision.
Yes. I just simply wish, if the tribunal please, to refer to the title or heading of item 12, which is headed Short Survey of Armament of the Czech Army, dated Berlin, 9 June 1938, and initial Z for Zeitzler. And item 13, questions of the Führer, dated Berlin, 9 June 1938, and classified most secret. I should like to read 4 of the questions which Hitler wanted authoritative information about, as shown by that document. And I read indicated questions on pages 23, 24, 25, 26 of item 13 of document 388 PS. Question 1, Hitler asked about armament of the Czech Army. I don't think it necessary to read the answers. They are detailed answers giving information in response to these questions posed by Hitler. Question 2, how many battalions, etc., are employed in the West for the construction of emplacements? Question 3, are the fortifications of Czechoslovakia still occupied in unreduced strength? Question 4, frontier protection in the West. As I say, those questions were answered in detail by the OKW and initialed by Colonel Zeitzler of Jodl Staff. As a precaution against French and British action during the attack on Czechoslovakia, it was necessary for the Nazi conspirators to rush the preparation of fortification measures along the western frontier in Germany. I refer you to item 8 at page 12 of the big Schmund file, a telegram presumably sent from Schmund in Berchtesgaden to Berlin. And I quote from this telegram. It is, as I say, item 8 of the Schmund file, page 12 of document 388 PS. Inform Colonel General von Brauchitz and General Keitel, and then skipping a paragraph, the Führer repeatedly emphasized the necessity of pressing forward greatly the fortification work in the West. In May, June, July, and August of 1938, conferences between Hitler and his political and military advisors resulted in the issuance of a series of constantly revised directives for the attack on Czechoslovakia. It was decided that preparations for X Day, the day of the attack, should be completed no later than 1 October. I now invite the attention of the tribunal to the more important of these conferences and directives. On 28 May 1938, Hitler called a conference of his principal advisors. At this meeting, he gave the necessary instructions to his fellow conspirators to prepare the attack on Czechoslovakia. This fact, Hitler later publicly admitted. I now refer and invite the notice of the tribunal to document 2360 PS, a copy of the Völkische Beobachter for 31 January 1939. In his speech before the Reichstag the preceding day, reported in this newspaper, reading now from document 2360 PS, Hitler spoke as follows. On account of this intolerable provocation, which had been aggravated by a truly infamous persecution and terrorization of our Germans there, I had resolved to solve once and for all, and this time radically, the Sudeten German question. On May 28, I ordered, 1, that preparations should be made for military action against this state by October 2. I ordered, 2, the immense and accelerated expansion of our defensive front in the West. 2 days after this conference, on 30 May 1938, Hitler issued the revised military directive for Case Green. This directive is item 11 in the big Schmund file, document 388 PS. It is entitled, I quote, "Two-Front War with Main Effort in the Southeast," ending the quote, and this directive replaced the corresponding section, Part 2, Section Roman 2, of the previous, quote, directive for unified preparation for war, ending the quote, which had been promulgated by von Blomberg on 26 June 1937, which I've already introduced in evidence as our document C-175, U.S. Exhibit number 69. This revised directive represented a further development of the ideas for political and military action discussed by Hitler and Keitel in their conference on 21 April. It is an expansion of a rough draft submitted by the defendant Keitel to Hitler on 20 May, which may be found as item 5 in the Schmund file. It was signed by Hitler. Only 5 copies were. 3 copies were forwarded with a covering letter from defendant Keitel to General von Brauchitsch for the Army, to defendant Raeder for the Navy, and to defendant Goering for the Luftwaffe. In his covering memorandum, Keitel noted that its execution must be assured, I quote, as from 1 October 1938 at the latest, end the quote. I now read from this document, which is the basic directive under which the Wehrmacht carried out its planning for Case Green. A rather lengthy quotation. 1, political prerequisites. It is my unalterable decision.
Which page is this?
From the first page of item 11. It's page 16. I'm
Page
sorry.
16.
16 of the
16.
English version.
Yes.
It is my unalterable decision to smash Czechoslovakia by military action in the near future. It is the job of the political leaders to await or bring about the politically and militarily
suitable moment. An inevitable development of conditions inside Czechoslovakia or other political events in Europe creating a surprisingly favorable opportunity, and one which may never come again, may cause me to take early action. The proper choice and determined and full utilization of a favorable moment is the surest guarantee of success. Accordingly, the preparations are to be made at once. 2, political possibilities for the commencement of the action. The following are necessary prerequisites for the intended invasion. A, suitable, obvious cause, and with it, B, sufficient political justification. C, action unexpected by the enemy, which will find him prepared to the least possible degree. From a military as well as a political standpoint, the most favorable course is a lightning swift action as the result of an incident through which Germany is provoked in an unbearable way, for which at least part of world opinion will grant the moral justification of military action. But even a period of tension, more or less preceding a war, must terminate in sudden action on our part, which must have the elements of surprise as regards time and extent. Before the enemy is advanced in military preparedness, is so advanced in military preparedness that he cannot be surpassed. 3, conclusions for the preparation of fall grün. A, for the armed war underscored, it is essential that the surprise element, as the most important factor contributing to success, be made full use of by appropriate preparatory measures, already in peacetime, and by an unexpectedly rapid course of the action. Thus, it is essential to create a situation within the first 4 days which plainly demonstrates to hostile nations eager to intervene the hopelessness of the Czechoslovakian military situation, and which at the same time will give nations with territorial claims on Czechoslovakia an incentive to intervene immediately against Czechoslovakia. In such a case, intervention by Poland and Hungary against Czechoslovakia may be expected, especially if France, due to the obvious pro-German attitude of Italy, fears or at least hesitates to unleash a European war by intervening against Germany. Attempts by Russia to give military support to Czechoslovakia, mainly by the Air Force, are to be expected. If concrete successes are not achieved by the land operation within the first few days, a European crisis will certainly result. This knowledge must give commanders of all ranks the impetus to decided and bold action. B, the propaganda war must, on the one hand, intimidate Czechoslovakia by threats and soften her power of resistance. On the other hand, issue directions to national groups for support in the armed war and influence the neutrals into our way of thinking. I reserve further directions and determination of the date. Four, tasks of the armed forces. Armed forces preparations are to be made on the following basis. A, the mass of all forces must be employed against Czechoslovakia. B, for the West, a minimum of forces are to be provided as rear cover, which may be required. The other frontiers in the East against Poland and Lithuania are merely to be protected. The southern frontiers to be watched. C, the sections of the army which can be rapidly employed must force the frontier fortifications with speed and decision and must break into Czechoslovakia with the greatest daring in the certainty that the bulk of the mobile army will follow them with the utmost speed. Preparations for this are to be made and timed in such a way that the sections of the army which can be rapidly employed cross the frontier at the appointed time, at the same time, underscored, as the penetration by the Air Force before the enemy can become aware of our mobilization. And a footnote for this, a timetable between Army and Air Force is to be worked out in conjunction with OKW and submitted to me for approval. 5, missions for the branches of the armed forces. A, Army. The basic principle of the surprise attack against Czechoslovakia must not be endangered by the inevitable time required for transporting the bulk of the field forces by rail, nor the initiative of the Air Force be wasted. Therefore, it is first of all essential to the Army that as many assault columns as possible be employed at the same time as the surprise attack by the Air Force. These assault columns, the composition of each, according to their tasks at that time, must be formed with troops which can be employed rapidly owing to their proximity to the frontier or to motorization and to special measures of readiness. It must be the purpose of these thrusts to break into the Czechoslovakian fortification lines at numerous points and in a strategically favorable direction to achieve a breakthrough or to break them down from the rear. For the success of this operation, cooperation with the Sudeten German frontier population, with deserters from the Czechoslovakian army, with parachutists or airborne troops, and with units of the sabotage service will be of importance. The bulk of the army has the task of frustrating the Czechoslovakian plan of defense. Of preventing the Czechoslovakian army from escaping.
Is it necessary to read all this detail? You got the thing up? Yes. Is it
I was just worried about not getting it into the transcript.
Seems to me that this is all detail of the plan, but before you pass from the document,
Yes.
ought you not to read the document on page 15, which introduces it, which gives the date of it?
Yes. I think so. It's a letter dated Berlin, 30 May, 1938. Copy of the fourth copy. Supreme Commander of the Armed Forces, SO, only, access only through officer. Written by an officer. Signed Keitel. Distributed to CNC Army, CNC Navy, CNC Air Force. By order of the Supreme Commander of the Armed Forces, Part 2, Section 2 of the Directive on the Unified Preparations for War of the Armed Forces, dated 24 June, 1937, with some symbols including Chefsache, or top secret. Two-front war with main effort on the southeast, strategic concentration, Grün, is to be replaced by the attached version. Its execution must be assured as from 1 October 1938 at the latest. Alterations in other parts of the directive must be expected during the next few weeks. By order, Chief of the Supreme Command of the Armed Forces, signed Keitel, and certified a true copy, Zeitzler, Oberstleutnant, on the General Staff. In line with the suggestion of the presiding justice, I shall omit detailed instructions which are set out for action by the Luftwaffe and by the Navy. And I turn next to the last paragraph of the directive, which will be found on page 19 of the English version. In war economy, it is essential that in the field of the armament industry, a maximum deployment of forces is made possible through increased supplies. In the course of operations, it is of value to contribute to the reinforcement of the total war economic strength by rapidly reconnoitering and restarting important factories. For this reason, the sparing of Czechoslovakian industrial and works installations, insofar as military operations permit, can be of decisive importance to us. In other words, the Nazi conspirators, 4 months before the date of their planned attack, were already looking forward to the contribution which the Czech industrial plant would make to further Nazi war effort economy. And the final paragraph of this directive, paragraph 7, on page 19, all preparations for sabotage and insurrection will be made by OKW. They will be made in agreement with and according to the requirements of the branches of the armed forces, so that their effects accord with the operations of the Army and Air Force. Signed Adolf Hitler, certified copy, signed Zeitzler, Oberstleutnant on the General Staff. 3 weeks later, on 18 June 1938, a draft for a new directive was prepared and initialed by the defendant Keitel. This is item 14 at pages 27 to 32 of the large Schmuth file. It did not supersede the 30 May directive, I shall read the third and fifth paragraphs on page 28 of the English translation, and the last paragraph on page 29. The immediate aim is a solution of the Czech problem by my own free decision. This stands in the foreground of my political intentions. I am determined to use to the full every favorable political opportunity to realize this aim. Then skipping a paragraph. However, I will decide to take action against Czechoslovakia only if I am firmly convinced, as in the case of the occupation of the demilitarized zone and the entry into Austria, that France will not march, and therefore England will not intervene. And then skipping to the last paragraph on the 29th page, the directives necessary for the prosecution of the war itself will be issued by me from time to time, K, the initial of Keitel, and Z, the initial of Zeitzler. The second and third parts of this directive contain general directions for the deployment of troops and for precautionary measures in view of the possibility that during the execution of Fall Grün, or Case Green, France or England might declare war on Germany. 6 pages of complicated schedules which follow this draft in the original have not been translated into English. These schedules, which constitute item 15 in the Schmundt file, give a timetable of specific measures for the preparation of the Army, Navy, and Luftwaffe for the contemplated action. Corroboration for the documents in the Schmundt file is found in General Jodel's diary. Our document number 1780 PS and U.S. Exhibit number 72, from which I quoted portions during the Austrian presentation. I now quote from 3 entries in this diary written in the spring of 1938. Although the first entry is not dated, it appears to have been written several months after the annexation of Austria. And here I read under the heading on page 3 of the English translation, under the heading Later Undated Entry, after annexation of Austria, the Führer mentions that there is no hurry to solve the Czech question because Austria has to be digested first. Nevertheless, preparations for Case Green will have to be carried out energetically. They will have to be newly prepared on the basis of the changed strategic position because of the annexation of Austria. State of preparations, see Memorandum L1A of 19 April, reported to the Führer on 21 April. The intention of the Führer not to touch the Czech problem as yet is changed because of the Czech strategic troop concentration of 21 May, which occurs without any German threat and without the slightest cause for it. Because of Germany's self-restraint, its consequences lead to a loss of prestige for the Führer, which he is not willing to take once more. Therefore, the new authorization for green on 30 May. And then the entry at 23 May, Major Schmunt reports ideas of the Führer. Further conferences, which gradually reveal the exact intentions of the Führer, take place with the Chief of the Armed Forces High Command, OKW, on 28 May, 3 and 9 June, see enclosures. Then the entry of 30 May, the Führer signs Directive Green, where he states his final decision to destroy Czechoslovakia soon, and thereby initiates military preparation all along the line. The previous intentions of the Army must be changed considerably in the direction of an immediate breakthrough into Czechoslovakia right on D-Day, ex-top, combined with aerial penetration by the Air Force. Further details are derived from directives for strategic concentration of the Army. The whole contrast becomes acute once more between the Führer's intuition that we must do it this year and the opinion of the Army that we cannot do it as yet, as most certainly the Western powers will interfere, and we are not as yet equal to them. During the spring and summer of 1938, the Luftwaffe was also engaged in planning in connection with the forthcoming Case Green and the further expansion of the Reich. I now offer in evidence document R-150 as Exhibit USA 82. This is a top-secret document dated 2 June 1938, issued by Air Group Command 3 and entitled Plan Study 1938, Instructions for Deployment and Combat, Case Red. Case Red is the code name for action against the Western powers, if need be. 28 copies of this document were made, of which this is number 16. This is another staff plan, this time for mobilization and employment of the Luftwaffe in the event of war with France. It is given significance by the considerable progress by this date of the planning for the attack on Czechoslovakia. I quote from the second paragraph on page 3 of the English translation, referring to the various possibilities under which war with France may occur. You will note that they are all predicated on the assumption of a German-Czech conflict. France, I quote, France will, A, either interfere in the struggle between the Reich and Czechoslovakia in the course of Case Green, or B, start hostilities simultaneously with Czechoslovakia. C, it is possible but not likely that France will begin the fight while Czechoslovakia still remains aloof. And then, reading down lower on the page under the heading Intention. Regardless of whether France enters the war as a result of Case Green, or whether she makes the opening move of the war simultaneously with Czechoslovakia, in any case, the mass of the German offensive formations will, in conjunction with the Army, first deliver the decisive blow against Czechoslovakia. By midsummer, direct and detailed planning for Case Green was being carried out by the Luftwaffe. In early August, at the direction of the Luftwaffe General Staff, the German air attaché in Prague reconnoitered the Freudenthal area of Czechoslovakia, south of Upper Silesia, for suitable landing grounds. I offer in evidence document 1536 PS as Exhibit USA 83, a report of the Luftwaffe General Staff Intelligence Division dated 12 August 1938. This was a top secret document for general officers only, of which only 2 copies were made. Attached as an enclosure was the report of Major Murica, the German air attaché in Prague, dated 4 August 1938. I quote the first 4 paragraphs of the enclosure. I was ordered by the General Staff of the Air Force to reconnoiter the land in the region Freudenthal, Freihermersdorf.
Page 3, isn't it?
Sir?
Page 3 of the document.
Yes. For possible landing possibilities. For landing possibilities, I'm sorry. For this purpose, I obtained private lodgings in Freudenthal with the manufacturer Marchholt through one of my trusted men in Prague. I had specifically ordered this man to give no details about me to M, particularly about my official position. I used my official car, Dienst PKW, for the journey to FR, taking precautions against being observed. By 25 August, the imminence of the attack on Czechoslovakia compelled the issuance by the Luftwaffe of a detailed intelligence memorandum entitled Extended Case Green. In other words, an estimate of possible action by the Western powers during the attack on Czechoslovakia. I now offer this document in evidence, number 375 PS, as Exhibit USA 84. This is a top secret memorandum of the intelligence section of the Luftwaffe General Staff, dated Berlin, 25 August 1938. Based on the assumption that Great Britain and France will declare war on Germany during Case Green, this study contains an estimate of the strategy and air strength of the Western powers as of 1 October 1938, the target date for Case Green. I quote the first 2 sentences of the document. One, that's under the heading Initial Political Situation. One, the basic assumption is that France will declare war during the case green. It is presumed that France will only decide upon war if active military assistance by Great Britain is definitely assured. Now, knowledge of the pending or impending action against Czechoslovakia was not confined to a close circle of high officials of the Reich and the Nazi Party. During the summer, Germany's allies, Italy and Hungary, were apprised by one means or another of the plans of the Nazi conspirators. I offer in evidence document 2800, PS, as Exhibit USA 85, This is a captured document from German Foreign Office files, a confidential memorandum of a conversation with the Italian ambassador Attalico in Berlin on 18 July 1938. At the bottom is a handwritten note headed for the Reich Minister only. Now, the Reich Minister was the defendant Ribbentrop. I now read this note. I read from the note the third and fourth paragraphs. Attalico added that we had made it unmistakably clear to the Italians what our intentions are regarding Czechoslovakia. He also knew the appointed time well enough so that he could take perhaps a 2 months holiday now, which he could not do later on. Giving an idea of the attitude of other governments, Attalico mentioned that the Romanian government had refused to grant application for leave to its Berlin minister.
Convenient time to break off for 10 minutes.
May it please the tribunal. A month later, Mussolini sent a message to Berlin asking that he be told the date on which Case Green would take place. I offer in evidence document 2791 PS as Exhibit USA 86, a German Foreign Office note on a conversation with Ambassador Attalico. This note is signed R for Ribbentrop and dated 23 August 1938. I now read 2 paragraphs from this memorandum. On the voyage of the Patria, Ambassador Attalico explained to me that he had instructions to request the notification of a contemplated time for German action against Czechoslovakia from the German government. In case the Czechs should again cause a provocation against Germany, Germany would march. This would be tomorrow, in 6 weeks, or perhaps in a year. 6 months, I mean. However, I could promise him that the German government, in case of an increasing gravity of this situation, or as soon as the Führer made his decision, would notify the Italian chief of government as rapidly as possible. In any case, the Italian government will be the first one who will receive such a notification. Four days later, pardon me, sir?
What the initial was, did you?
The initial R for Ribbentrop.
Ribbentrop.
And the date, 23 August 1938. 4 days later, Italico again asked to be notified of the date of the pending attack. I offer document number 2792 PS as Exhibit USA 87. Another German Foreign Office memorandum. And from that document, I read 3 paragraphs under the heading RM 251. Ambassador Italico paid me a visit today at 12 o'clock to communicate the following. He had received another written instruction from Mussolini asking that Germany communicate in time the probable date of action against Czechoslovakia. Mussolini asked for such notification, as Mr. Italico assured me, in order, quote, to be able to take in due time the necessary measures on the French frontier. Berlin, 27 August 1938, R for Ribbentrop. And then NB, I replied to Ambassador Italico, just as on his former démarche, that I could not impart any date to him. That, however, in any case, Mussolini would be the first one to be informed of any decision. Berlin, 2 September 1938. Hungary, which borders Czechoslovakia to the southeast, was from the first considered to be a possible participant in Case Green. You will recall that in early March 1938, defendants Keitel and Ribbentrop had exchanged letters on the question of bringing Hungary into the Nazi planning. At that time, the decision was in the negative. But by mid-August 1938, the Nazi conspirators were attempting to persuade Hungary to join in the attack. From August 21 to 26, Admiral Horthy and some of his ministers visited Germany. Inevitably, there were discussions of the Czechoslovak question. I now offer document 2796 PS as Exhibit USA 88. This is a captured German Foreign Office account signed by von Weizsäcker of the conversations between Hitler and Ribbentrop and a Hungarian delegation consisting of Horthy, Imreti, and Kanya aboard the SS Patria on 23 August 1938. In this conference, Ribbentrop inquired about the Hungarian attitude in the event of a German attack on Czechoslovakia and suggested that such an attack would prove to be a good opportunity for Hungary. The Hungarians, with the exception of Horthy, who wished to put the Hungarian intention to participate on record, proved reluctant to commit themselves. Thereupon Hitler emphasized Ribbentrop's statement and said, I quote, "Whoever wanted to join the meal would have to participate in the cooking as well." I now quote from this document the first two paragraphs. While in the forenoon of the 23rd of August, the Führer and the Regent of Hungary were engaged in a political discussion, the Hungarian ministers, Imreti and Kanya, were in conference with Mr. von Ribbentrop. Mr. von Weizsäcker also attended the conference. Von Kanya introduced two subjects for discussion. Point one, the negotiations between Hungary and the Little Entente, and two, the Czechoslovakian problem. Then I skipped two paragraphs and read the fifth paragraph. Von Ribbentrop inquired what Hungary's attitude would be if the Führer would carry out his decision to answer a new Czech provocation by force. The reply of the Hungarians presented two kinds of obstacles. The Yugoslavian neutrality must be assured if Hungary marches towards the north and perhaps the east. Moreover, the Hungarian rearmament had only been started, and 1 to 2 more years' time for its development should be allowed. Von Ribbentrop then explained to the Hungarians that the Yugoslavs would not dare to march while they were between the pincers of the Axis powers. Romania alone would therefore not move. England and France would also remain tranquil. England would not recklessly risk her empire. She knew our newly acquired power. In reference to time, however, for the above-mentioned situation, nothing definitely could be predicted, since it would depend on Czech provocation. Von Ribbentrop repeated that whoever desires revision must exploit the good opportunity and participate. The Hungarian reply thus remained a conditional one. Upon the question of von Ribbentrop what purpose the desired General Staff conferences were to have, not much more was brought forward than the Hungarian desire of a mutual inventory of military material and preparedness for the Czech conflict. The clear political basis for such a conference, the time of Hungarian intervention, was not obtained. In the meantime, more positive language was used by von Horthy in his talk with the Führer. He wished not to hide his doubts with regard to the English attitude but he wished to put Hungary's intention to participate on record. The Hungarian ministers were and remained, even later, more skeptical, since they feel more strongly about the immediate danger for Hungary with its unprotected flanks. When von Imrede had a discussion with the Führer in the afternoon, he was very relieved when the Führer explained to him that in regard to the situation in question, he demanded nothing of Hungary. He himself would not know the time. Whoever wanted to join the meal would have to participate in the cooking as well. Should Hungary wish conferences of the General Staff, he would have no objection. I think perhaps that sentence, whoever wanted to join the meal would have to participate in the cooking as well, is perhaps as cynical a statement as any statesman has ever been guilty of. By the third day of the conference, the Germans were able to note that in the event of a German-Czech conflict, Hungary would be sufficiently armed for participation on 1 October. I now offer in evidence document number 2797, PS, as Exhibit USA 89, another captured German Foreign Office memorandum of a conversation between Ribbentrop and Kenya on 25 August 1938. You will note that the mimeographed English translation bears the date 29 August. That is incorrect. It should read 25 August. I read the last paragraph from that document, or the last two. Concerning Hungary's military preparedness, in case of a German-Czech conflict, von Kanya mentioned several days ago that his country would need a period of 1 to 2 years in order to develop adequately the armed strength of Hungary. During today's conversation, von Kanya corrected this remark and said that Hungary's military situation was much better. His country would be ready, as far as armaments were concerned, to take part in the conflict by October 1 of this year. Signed with an illegible signature which probably is that of Weizsäcker. The account of the German-Hungarian conference, again, finds its corroboration in General Jodel's diary. Document 1780 PS, from which I've already several times read. The entry in that diary for 21 to 26 August, on page 4 of the English version of the document, reads as follows. Visit to Germany of the Hungarian Regent, accompanied by the Prime Minister, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, and the, I don't know what that word is, Minister von Ratz, with a question mark in the original, in parentheses. They arrived with the idea that in the course of a great war, after a few years, and with the help of German troops, the old state of Hungary can be reestablished. They leave with the understanding that we have neither demands from nor claims against them, but that Germany will not stand for a second provocation by Czechoslovakia, even if it should be tomorrow. If they want to participate at that moment, it is up to them. Germany, however, will never play the role of arbitrator between them and Poland. The Hungarians agree, but they believe that when the issue arises, a period of 48 hours would be indispensable to them to find out Yugoslavia's attitude. The upshot of the talks with the Hungarians proved to be a staff conference on 6 September. I quote again from the Jodl diary, the entry for 6 September, beginning at the end of that same page. Chief of General Staff, General of Artillery Halder, has a conference with the Hungarian Chief of General Staff Fischer. Before that, he is briefed by me on the political attitude of the Führer, especially his order not to give any hint on the exact moment. The same with OQI General von Stutennagel. It is somewhat interesting to find a high-ranking general giving a briefing on such political matters. Then we come to final actual preparations for the attack. With a 1 October target date set for Case Green, there was a noticeable increase in the tempo of the military preparations in late August and September. Actual preparations for the attack on Czechoslovakia were well underway. The agenda of the Nazi conspirators was devoted to technical details. The timing of X-Day, questions of mobilization, questions of transport and supply. On 26 August, the defendant Jodl initialed a memorandum entitled, I quote, "Timing of the X order and the question of advance measures," ending the quote. This is item 17 at pages 37 and 38 of the English translation of the Schmunt file on Case Green, our number 388 PS. I should like to invite the special attention of the tribunal to this memorandum. It demonstrates beyond the slightest doubt the complicity of the OKW and of defendants Keitel and Jodl in the shameful fabrication of an incident as an excuse for war. It reveals in bare outline the deceit, the barbarity, the completely criminal character of the attack that Germany was preparing to launch. I ask leave to read this document in full. Chief, Section L, written by General Staff Officer, most secret, SO only, Berlin, 24 August, 1938. Access only through officer. One copy. timing of the exorder, and the question of advance measures. The Luftwaffe's endeavor to take the enemy air forces by surprise at their peacetime airports justifiably leads them to oppose measures taken in advance of the exorder and to demand that the exorder itself be given sufficiently late on X-1 to prevent the fact of Germany's mobilization becoming known to Czechoslovakia on that day. The Army's efforts are tending in the opposite direction. It intends to let OKW initiate all advance measures between X-3 and X-1, which will contribute to the smooth and rapid working of the mobilization. With this in mind, OKW, next word is illegible in my copy, also demands that the exorder be given not later than 1400 on X-1. To this, the following must be said. Operation Grün, or Action Grün, will be set in motion by means of an incident in Czechoslovakia, which will give Germany provocation for military intervention. The fixing of the exact time, underscored exact time, for this incident is of the utmost importance. I call a special attention to that sentence. The fixing of the exact time for this incident is of the utmost importance. It must come at a time when weather conditions are favorable for our superior air forces to go into action, and at an hour which will enable authentic news of it, news of this prepared incident, to reach us on the afternoon of X-1. It can then be spontaneously answered by the giving of the exorder at 1400 on X-1. On X-2, the Navy, Army, and Air Force will merely receive an advance warning. If the Führer intends to follow this plan of action, all further discussion is superfluous. For then, no advance measures may be taken before X-1, for which there is not an innocent explanation, as we shall otherwise appear to have manufactured the incident. Orders for absolutely essential advance measures must be given in good time and camouflaged with the help of the numerous maneuvers and exercises. Also, the question raised by the Foreign Office as to whether all Germans should be called back in time from prospective enemy territories must in no way lead to the conspicuous departure from Czechoslovakia of any German subjects before the incident. Even a warning of diplomatic representatives in Prague is impossible before the first air attack, although the consequences could be very grave in the event of their becoming victims of such an attack. That is, the death of representatives of friendly or confirmed neutral powers. If for technical reasons the evening hours should be considered desirable for the incident, then the following day cannot be X day, but it must be the day after that. In any case, we must act on the principle that nothing must be done before the incident which might point to mobilization, and that the swiftest possible action must be taken after the incident. It is the purpose of these notes to point out what a great interest the Wehrmacht has in the incident. and that it must be informed of the Führer's intentions in good time, insofar as the Abwehr section is not also charged with the organization of the incident. I request that the Führer's decision be obtained on these points. Signed, J. Jodl. In handwriting, at the bottom of the page on that document, are the notes of the indefatigable Schmundt, Hitler's adjutant. These reveal that the memorandum was submitted to Hitler on August 30th, that Hitler agreed to act along these lines, and that Jodl was so notified on 31 August. There follows Jodl's initials once more. On 3 September, Keitel and von Brauchitsch met with Hitler at the Berghof. Again, Schmundt kept notes of the conference. These will be found as item 18 at pages 39 and 40 of document 388 PS. I shall read the first 3 short paragraphs of these minutes. General Oberst von Brauchitsch reports on the exact time of the transfer of the troops to exercise areas for Grün. Field units to be transferred on 28 September from here will then be ready for action. When X day becomes known, field units carry out exercises in opposite directions. Führer has objection. Troops assemble field units a 2-day march away. Carry out camouflage exercises everywhere. And a question mark, OKH must know when X day is by 1200 noon, 27 September. You will note that von Brauchitsch reported that field troops would be transferred to the proper areas for Case Grün on 28 September and would then be ready for action. You will also note that the OKH must know X day, when X day is, by 12 noon on 27 September. During the remainder of the conference, Hitler gave his views on the strategy the German armies should employ and the strength of the Czech defenses they would encounter. He spoke of the possibility, and I quote, of drawing in the Henland people, end the quote. The situation in the West still troubled him. Schmundt further noted, and here I read the final sentence from page 40 of the English transcript. The Führer gives orders for the development of the Western fortification, improvement of advanced positions around Aachen and Saarbrücken, construction of 300 to 400 battery positions, 1,600 artillery pieces. He emphasizes flanking action. 5 days later, General Stupnagel asked Lieutenant Jodl for written assurance that the OKH would be informed 5 days in advance about the impending action. In the evening, Jodl conferred with Luftwaffe generals about the coordination of ground and air operations at the start of the attack. I now read the 8th September entry in General Jodl's diary at page 5 of the English translation of document 1780 PS. General Stupnagel, OQI, asks for written assurance that the Army High Command will be informed 5 days in advance if the plan is to take place. I agree and add that the overall meteorological situation can be estimated to some extent only for 2 days in advance, and that therefore the plans may be changed up to this moment, that is D-Day -2. Or as the German puts it, X-2 Tage. General Stuppnagel mentions that for the first time, he wonders whether the previous basis of the plan is not being abandoned. It presupposed that the Western powers would not interfere decisively. It gradually seems as if the Führer would stick to his decision, even though he may no longer be of this opinion. It must be added that Hungary is at least moody and that Italy is reserved. Now, this is Jodl talking to you. I must admit that I am worrying too when comparing the change of opinion about political and military potentialities according to directives of 24 June, 5 November 37, 7 December 37, 30 May 1938, with the last statements. In spite of that, one must be aware of the fact that the other nations will do everything they can to apply pressure to us. We must pass this test of nerves, but because only very few people know the art of withstanding this pressure successfully, the only possible solution is to inform only a very small circle of officers of news that causes us anxiety, and not to have it circulate through anterooms as heretofore. 1,800 hours to 2,100 hours, conference with Chief of Army High Command and Chief of General Staff of the Air Force. Present were Jeschonik, Komhuber, Sternberg, and myself. We agree about the promulgation of the D-Day order, the Ex-Befehl, X-1, 4 o'clock, and pre-announcement to the Air Force, D-Day -1, X-1 day, 7 o'clock. The Y time has yet to be examined. Some formations have an approach flight of 1 hour. Late on the evening of the following day, 9 September, Hitler met with Defendant Keitel and Generals von Brauchitsch and Halder at Nuremberg. Dr. Todt, the construction engineer, later joined this conference, which lasted from 10 in the evening until 3:30 the following morning. Schmundt's minutes on this conference are item 19 in the large Schmundt file at pages 41 to 43 of document 388 PS. In this meeting, General Halder reviewed the missions assigned to 4 of the German armies being committed to the attack: the 2nd, 10th, 12th, and 14th German armies. With his characteristic enthusiasm for military planning, Hitler then delivered a soliloquy on strategic considerations which should be taken into account as the attack developed. I shall quote only 4 paragraphs, beginning with the summary of General von Brauchitz's remarks on the bottom of page 42. General Oberst von Brauchitsch: Employment of motorized divisions was based on the difficult rail situation in Austria and the difficulties in getting other DIVS for divisions ready to march into the area at the right time. In the West, vehicles will have to leave on the 20th of September if X Day remains as planned. Workers leave on the 23rd by relays. Specialist workers remain according to decision by Army Command 2. The Führer doesn't see why workers have to return home as early as X-11. Other workers and people are also on the way on mobilization day. Also, the railroad cars, they will stand around unnecessarily later on. General Keitel, workers are not under the jurisdiction of district command in the West. Trains must be assembled. Von Brauchitz, 235,000 men, RAD, that's the labor service, will be drafted. 96 construction battalions will be distributed, also in the East. 40,000 trained laborers stay in the West. From this date forward, the Nazi conspirators were occupied with the intricate planning which is required before such an attack. On 11 September, Defendant Jodl conferred with a representative of the propaganda ministry about methods of refuting German violations of international law and of exploiting those of the Czechs. And I read the 11 September entry in the Jodl diary at page 5 of the English translation of 1780 PS. In the afternoon, conference with Secretary of State Janka for the Ministry of Public Enlightenment and Propaganda on imminent common tasks. The joint preparations for refutation, Widerlegung, of our own violations of international law and the exploitation of its violations by the enemy were considered particularly important. This discussion developed into a detailed study compiled by Section L, that's Jodl's section of the OKW. I now offer in evidence document number C2 as Exhibit USA 90. Which is a carbon copy of the original, signed in pencil. 7 copies of this captured document, as it shows on its face, were prepared and distributed on 1 October 1938 to the OKH, the OKM, the Luftwaffe, and the Foreign Office. In this study, anticipated violations by Germany of international law in connection with the invasion of Czechoslovakia are listed and counter-propaganda suggested for the use of the propaganda agencies. It's a highly interesting, top-secret document, and at a glance at the original, you can see the careful form in which the study of anticipated violations of international law and propagandistic refutations thereof was set out. The document is prepared in tabular form, in which the anticipated instances of violation of international law are listed in the left-hand column. In the second column are given specific examples of the incidents. In the third and fourth column, the position to be taken towards these incidents in violation of international law and in violation of the laws of warfare is set forth. The fifth column, which in this document unfortunately is blank, was reserved for the explanations to be offered by the propaganda minister. I first quote from the covering letter. Enclosed is a list drawn up by Section L of the OKW of the violations of international law which may be expected on the part of fighting troops. Owing to the short time allowed for the compilation, columns C1 and C2 had to be filled in directly here for the time being. The branches of the armed forces are requested to send in an opinion here so that a final version may be drawn up. The same is requested of the Foreign Office. The Chief of the Supreme Command of the Armed Forces, by order, signed Berkner. I'm sorry that I perhaps cannot take the time to read extensively from this document. I shall confine myself to reading the first 10 hypothetical incidents for which justification must be found from the second column, column B, of the table. First, in an air raid on Prague, the British embassy is destroyed. Second, Englishmen or Frenchmen are injured or killed. Third, the Tradition is destroyed in an air raid on Prague. Four, on account of a report that the Czechs have used gas, the firing of gas projectiles is ordered. 5, Czech civilians not recognizable as soldiers are caught in the act of sabotage, destruction of important bridges, destruction of foodstuffs and fodder, are discovered looting wounded or dead soldiers, and thereupon shot. 6, captured Czech soldiers or Czech civilians are detailed to do road work or to load munitions. 7, for military reasons, it is necessary to requisition billets, foodstuffs, and fodder from the Czech population. As a result, the latter suffer from want. 8, Czech population is, for military reasons, compulsorily evacuated to the rear area. 9, churches are used for military accommodation. 10, in the course of their duty, German aircraft fly over Polish territory where they are involved in an air battle with Czech aircraft. From Nuremberg, on the 10th of September, Hitler issued an order bringing the Reich Arbeitsdienst, the German labor service, under the OKW. This top-secret order...
Are you passing from that document now?
Pardon me?
Are you passing from that document now?
Yes.
Oughtn't you to read the justification with reference to gas?
Perhaps I should, sir.
It's number 4. Number 4.
Incident number 4?
Yes.
Well, number 4 was the supposed incident on account of a report that the Czechs have used gas. The firing of gas projectiles is ordered. Under the column Attitude of International Law Group, according to the declaration agreed to in June 1925 by 40 states, including Czechoslovakia, the employment of poison gases, chemical warfare agents, and bacteriological substances is expressly forbidden. Quite a number of states made the reservation to this declaration on the prohibition of gas warfare. And then under the column headed Justification by the Laws of War, if the assertion that the opponent, in this case the Czechs, used a prohibited gas in warfare is to be believed by the world, it must be possible to prove it. If that is possible, the firing of gas projectiles is justified, and it must be given out in public that it can be proved that the enemy was the first to violate the prohibition. It is therefore particularly important to furnish this proof. If the assertion is unfounded or only partially founded, the gas attack is to be represented only as the need for carrying out a justified reprisal. In the same way did the Italians in the Abyssinian War. In this case, however, the justification for such harsh reprisals must also be proved. From Nuremberg, on the 10th of September, Hitler issued an order bringing the Reich Arbeitsdienst, the German labor service, under the OKW.
Passage which seems to be material.
I was very much tempted to read the whole document.
The justification of number 10.
Number 10 was, in the course of their duty, German aircraft fly over Polish territory where they are involved in an air battle with Czech aircraft. Under the heading Attitude of the International Law Group, according to Article 1 of the Fifth Hague Convention of 18 October 1907, the territory of neutral powers is not to be violated. A deliberate violation by flying over this territory is a breach of international law if the neutral powers have declared. I suppose that means if they have declared their neutrality. Oh, I beg your pardon, that should not be a period. If the neutral powers have declared an air barrier for combat aircraft. If German planes fly over Polish territory, this constitutes a violation of international law, provided that this action is not expressly permitted. Now, under the heading Justification by the Laws of War is this. An attempt at denial should first be made. If this is unsuccessful, a request for pardon should be made on the grounds of miscalculation of position to the Polish government and compensation for damage guaranteed.
Would you go on till 1:45?
Beg your pardon?
Would you go on till
Yes, sir, I can go on. I had referred to the order of 14 September by which Defendant Keitel issued detailed instructions. No, I'm sorry. I'd referred to an order issued by Hitler on 10 September from Nuremberg, bringing the German labor service under the OKW. This top-secret order, of which 25 copies were made, is item 20 in the Schmund file at page 44. I will read that order. 1. The whole RAD organization comes under the command of the Supreme Command of the Army, effective 15 September. 2. The Chief of OKW decides on the first commitments of this organization in conjunction with the Reich labor leader, the Reich Arbeitsführer, and on assignments from time to time to the Supreme Commands of the Navy, Army, and Air Force. Where questions arise with regard to competency, he will make a final decision in accordance with my instructions. 3, for the time being, this order is to be made known only to the departments and personnel immediately concerned. Signed, Adolf Hitler. 4 days later, on 14 September, Defendant Keitel issued detailed instructions for the employment of specific RAD units. This order is item 21 in the Schmund file at page 45 in the English translation. I don't think I need read the order. There's another order issued by the defendant Jodl on 16 September, item 24 at page 48 in the Schmund file. I think I need only read the heading or title of that. Subject, employment of Reich labor service for maneuvers with Wehrmacht. 1, effective 15 September, the following units will be under command of the CNC of the Army. 1, the RAD forces of the Light Road Construction Battalions. 2 further entries in the defendant Jodl's diary give further indications of the problems of the OKW in this period of mid-September, just 2 weeks before the anticipated X-Day. I now read the entries for 15 and 16 September at pages 5 and 6 of the English translation of the Jodl diary. 15 September, in the morning conference with Chief of Army High Command and Chief of General Staffs of Army and Air Forces, the question was discussed: what could be done if the Fuhrer insists on advancement of the date due to the rapid development of the situation? 16 September, General Keitel returns from the Berghof at 1700 hours. He graphically describes the results of the conference between Chamberlain and the Fuhrer. The next conference will take place on the 21st or the 22nd in Godesberg. With consent of the Fuhrer, the order is given in the evening by the Armed Forces High Command to the Army High Command and to the Ministry of Finance to line up the VGAD along the Czech border. That I understand to have reference to the reinforced border guard. In the same way, an order is issued to the railways to have the empty rolling stock kept in readiness clandestinely for the strategic concentrations of the Army so that it can be transported starting 28 September. The order to the railroads to make rolling stock available, which General Jodl referred to, appears as item 22 at page 47 of the Schmund file. In this order, the defendant Keitel told the railroads to be ready by 28 September, but to continue work on the western fortifications even after 20 September in the interest of camouflage. I quote the first 4 paragraphs of this order. The Reichsbahn, that's the railroad, must provide trains of empty trucks in great numbers by September 28th for the carrying out of mobilization exercises. This task now takes precedence over all others. Therefore, the train loads for the limes job, I understand the limes job to have reference to defense fortifications in the West, will have to be cut down after September 17, and those goods loaded previous to this date unloaded by September 20. The Supreme Command of the Army, 5th Division of the Army General Staff, must issue further orders after consultation with the authorities concerned. However, in accordance with the Führer's directive, every effort should be made to continue to supply the materials in as large quantities as feasible, even after 20 September 1938, and this for reasons of camouflage, as well as in order to continue the important work on the lines. The penultimate stage of the aggression begins on 18 September. From that date until the 28th, a series of orders were issued advancing preparations for the attack. These orders are included in the Schmund file, and I shall not take the time of the tribunal by attempting to read all of them. On the 18th, the commitment schedule for the 5 participating armies, the 2nd, 8th, 10th, 12th, and 14th, was set forth, that's item 26, in the Schmund file at page 50 of the English translation. Hitler approved the secret mobilization of 5 divisions in the West to protect the German rear during Case Green, and I refer to item 31 in the Schmund file at page 13. Further discussions
Did you mean page 55?
Item 30, I beg your pardon, it's page 55. I had a misprint. That I might refer to, that is a most secret order. Berlin, 27/9/1938, 1920 hours, 45 copies, of which this is the 16th. The Führer has approved the mobilization without warning of the 5 regular West divisions, 26th, 34th, 36th, 32nd, and 35th. The Führer and Supreme Commander of the Armed Forces has expressly reserved the right to issue the order for employment in the fortification zone and the evacuation of this zone by the workers of the TOT organization. It is left to the OKH to assemble as far as possible, first of all, the sections ready to march, and subsequently the remaining sections of the divisions in marshalling areas behind the western fortifications. Signed, Yodel.
Perhaps that would be a good time to break off.